If they love you, they will do this and ignore you. This paradox hides a profound psychological truth that Carl Jung understood perfectly. Have you ever wondered why someone who claims to love you suddenly distances themselves without explanation? Why does silence sometimes speak louder than 1,000 words in love? There's a fascinating psychological reason for this contradictory behavior. What seems like rejection might actually be an unconscious expression of love. Jung discovered that our collective unconscious holds ancestral patterns that govern our most intimate relationships, creating an invisible dance between approach and distance. In this video, we will unravel the psychological forces that make people who truly love you sometimes need to pull away, and why this might be the deepest sign of an authentic connection. The emotional paradox in relationships is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human connection. According to Carl Jung, love is not a simple, straightforward emotion, but rather a complex interplay of conscious desires and unconscious needs. This paradox manifests when someone who deeply loves you creates distance, not in spite of their feelings, but because of them. Jung believed that true intimacy activates our deepest psychological mechanisms. When we experience profound love, it inevitably triggers our emotional wounds, insecurities, and what Jung called our shadow, those parts of ourselves we've repressed or denied. This confrontation can be overwhelming, causing a person to temporarily withdraw to process these powerful emotions. Consider how often the strongest connections cause us to feel vulnerable. This vulnerability can be frightening, especially for those who haven't yet integrated their shadow aspects. The closer someone gets to us emotionally, the more our psychological defenses activate. It's a protective mechanism rooted in our evolutionary past. Jung observed that our psyche naturally seeks balance. When emotions become too intense or threatening to our sense of self, we instinctively create distance to re-establish equilibrium. This doesn't mean the love has diminished, quite the opposite. It indicates the connection is significant enough to disturb our psychological homeostasis. This explains why partners who truly love you might occasionally seem distant or preoccupied. They're not rejecting you, they're processing the profound impact you're having on their inner world. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological journey toward wholeness that paradoxically requires both connection and separation. What many mistake for indifference is often a sign that the relationship has touched something deep within. The person might be confronting their anima or animus, Jung's terms for the feminine aspect within men and the masculine aspect within women. These archetypal energies emerge strongly in intimate relationships and can temporarily overwhelm someone, not prepared for their power. The emotional paradox also reveals itself in how we communicate. Sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could. Jung recognized that meaningful connections often transcend verbal expression, creating spaces where partners communicate through energy, presence, and even absence. The silence between two people who love each other is never empty. It's filled with psychological processing and unconscious communication. For those experiencing this paradox, understanding its psychological underpinnings can be liberating. What feels like rejection is actually part of a natural rhythm in deep relationships, the ebb and flow that Jung saw as essential to psychological growth. This perspective transforms what might seem like abandonment into a necessary part of authentic connection. The most profound relationships, Jung taught us, aren't those that provide constant validation and presence, but those that give us space to integrate the powerful emotions they evoke. This is why someone who truly loves you might sometimes need to step back. They're making space for the transformation that real love inevitably brings. In the shadowy recesses of the human psyche lies the second dimension of why someone who loves you might seemingly pull away, what Jung called the shadow. This psychological phenomenon represents the aspects of ourselves we've rejected, repressed, or never acknowledged. In intimate relationships, these shadows emerge with surprising force, creating patterns that often baffle those caught in there. Jung observed that when we fall deeply in love, we don't just connect with the conscious personality of our partner, but also with their shadow aspects. This creates a peculiar psychological dynamic where the very person who brings us joy can also trigger our deepest wounds and insecurities. When someone loves you authentically, they inevitably begin to encounter these darker aspects of themselves that your presence illuminates. The shadow cannot remain hidden in intimate relationships. Your lover's shadow contains everything they've been taught to hide: vulnerabilities, desires, fears, and aspects of themselves deemed unacceptable by family or society. Your presence and love create a psychological mirror that reflects these hidden elements back to them, sometimes with uncomfortable clarity. This mirroring effect explains why someone might withdraw precisely when the connection deepens. They aren't rejecting you. They're confronting parts of themselves they've long avoided. Jung called this projection withdrawal, a process where a person must temporarily retreat to integrate what they're seeing about themselves through the relationship. Consider how often relationships follow this pattern. An initial period of intense connection followed by mysterious distance. Jung would explain this as the natural rhythm of psychological integration. The closer you get, the more shadow material emerges, necessitating periods of psychological processing that might look like withdrawal. This shadow dance has another dimension. Jung noted that we often project our own unlived potential onto those we love. When someone truly loves you, they may temporarily pull away because they're overwhelmed by seeing their own unlived life and possibilities reflected in you. Your very presence reminds them of paths not taken and aspects of themselves not yet developed. The shadow also contains cultural and collective elements. Men and women carry the weight of generational patterns and societal expectations about love and vulnerability. When someone loves you deeply, they may temporarily distance themselves while wrestling with these inherited patterns that conflict with their authentic feelings for you. Jung believed that love is transformative precisely because it confronts us with our shadow. When someone loves you enough to engage with this process, they'll inevitably cycle through periods of approach and withdrawal. This isn't emotional immaturity, but the natural rhythm of psychological growth. The distance isn't rejection, it's the space needed for integration. This shadow work explains why authentic love can feel threatening. It's not just about embracing the pleasant aspects of connection, but also facing our deepest fears of abandonment, engulfment, or loss of self. When these fears surface, a temporary retreat provides the psychological space needed to process these emotions without damaging the relationship. For Jung, the ultimate goal of this shadow work in relationships wasn't to eliminate these cycles of connection and distance, but to become conscious of them. Understanding that your partner's withdrawal might reflect their deep psychological processing rather than rejection can transform how you experience these natural rhythms of intimacy. The shadow of love teaches us that authentic connection isn't characterized by constant presence, but by the courage to engage with the full spectrum of psychological experience that intimacy evokes. When someone truly loves you, they will occasionally need to step back into their own psychological space, not to escape the relationship, but to make it deeper and more authentic through the integration of what your love has illuminated within them. The paradox of love and distance finds its resolution in what Jung would call authentic connection, a relationship where both individuals can be fully themselves while growing together. This concept goes far beyond superficial harmony or constant presence. In fact, Jung observed that the most authentic connections often involve periods of apparent separation, precisely because of their depth and transformative power. Authentic connection, in Jungian terms, emerges when two individuals relate not just through their personas, the faces we show to the world, but through their authentic selves. This deeper level of relating inevitably triggers what Jung called the individuation process, our psyche's natural movement toward wholeness and integration. When someone truly loves you, this process intensifies, sometimes necessitating periods of introspection that appear as withdrawal. Jung recognized that we develop psychologically through both connection and differentiation. True intimacy doesn't mean merging completely with another person, but maintaining your unique identity while deeply connecting. This delicate balance requires psychological space, moments when we step back to integrate what the relationship is teaching us about ourselves. The most profound connections create what Jung called psychological intimacy, a state where two people recognize and accept each other's wholeness, including their contradictions, vulnerabilities, and growth edges. This level of intimacy is far more challenging than constant validation or perpetual presence. It requires courage to witness another's psychological journey without trying to control or fix it. When someone genuinely loves you, they make space for your complete self. This includes respecting your need for solitude, independence, and personal development. Jung observed that many relationships fail precisely because they don't allow for this psychological breathing room. Authentic love doesn't demand constant attention or performance. It acknowledges the natural rhythms of closeness and distance that healthy individuals require. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, also appears in authentic connections. Have you noticed how someone who truly understands you might give you space exactly when you need it, without you having to ask? This intuitive attunement represents a deep, unconscious connection that transcends constant verbal communication or physical presence. The authentic connection also involves what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. In any meaningful relationship, contradictory needs and desires naturally emerge. The need for closeness versus independence, the desire for security versus adventure. Someone who loves you authentically doesn't try to eliminate these tensions, but understands they're essential to psychological growth. Jung observed that many people mistake constant attention for love, when authentic connection often manifests in the quality of presence rather than its quantity. When someone loves you deeply, they bring their full attention and authentic self to your interactions, creating moments of genuine connection that sustain the relationship through periods of physical or emotional distance. This explains why someone who truly cares for you might sometimes appear to ignore you. They're respecting your psychological boundaries while maintaining the connection at a deeper level. Jung would call this conscious relating, the ability to stay psychologically connected even during periods of separation or conflict. The modern world offers few models for this type of connection. We're bombarded with images of relationships characterized by constant communication, validation, and presence. But Jung would argue that authentic connection requires psychological space, room for both individuals to process, integrate, and evolve. When someone loves you enough to give you this space and take it for themselves, they're demonstrating profound respect for the natural rhythms of psychological development. Authentic connection also involves what Jung called constructive conflict. The willingness to engage with differences rather than avoid them. Someone who authentically loves you won't shy away from necessary tension, but will engage with it consciously, sometimes stepping back to gain perspective before re-engaging with greater clarity. This is why, paradoxically, periodic distance in a relationship can be a sign of its depth and authenticity. It reflects a mutual respect for the individuating process that genuine connection inevitably triggers. When someone truly loves you, They understand that both connection and space are essential ingredients in the alchemy of lasting intimacy. The final dimension of why those who love you might paradoxically create distance lies in what Jung called the archetypal patterns that govern human relationships. These archetypes, universal symbols and patterns residing in our collective unconscious, create a complex psychological choreography that influences our most intimate connections. Jung identified several key archetypes that emerge powerfully in romantic relationships. The anima, the feminine energy within men, and animus, the masculine energy within women, play particularly significant roles. When someone falls in love, they often initially project these inner archetypes onto their partner, creating an almost mythical connection that feels destined or magical. However, as the relationship deepens, a psychological shift inevitably occurs. The person begins to recognize that their partner isn't just carrying their projected anima or animus, but is a complete individual with their own psychological complexity. This recognition can trigger what Jung called archetypal withdrawal, a necessary psychological process where a person must temporarily pull back to differentiate between their archetypal projections and the real human being they love. This archetypal dance creates rhythmic patterns of approach and withdrawal that often confuse those experiencing them. Someone might intensely pursue you, then inexplicably pull away, not because their feelings have changed, but because they're navigating this complex archetypal terrain. They're not rejecting you, but engaging with the powerful psychological forces that true intimacy activates. Jung observed that many relationships follow archetypal patterns from mythology and folklore. The hero's journey, the divine marriage, the alchemical transformation. These ancient narratives live within our collective psyche and shape our emotional experiences. When someone loves you deeply, they often unconsciously enact these archetypal patterns, including the necessary separations and challenges that these mythic narratives contain. The lover archetype itself contains inherent paradoxes. It represents both union and individuality, passion and endurance, possession and freedom. This internal tension explains why someone who truly loves you might periodically need space. They're navigating the archetypal contradictions that authentic love inevitably contains. Another powerful archetype in relationships is what Jung called the wounded healer. This pattern emerges when your presence activates both another person's wounds and their capacity for healing. When someone loves you enough to engage with this archetype, they may temporarily withdraw to integrate the healing that your connection is catalyzing within them. The archetypal nature of relationships also explains why the most profound connections often involve patterns that transcend rational understanding. Jung noted that true intimacy frequently activates what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to unite conscious and unconscious elements in new, creative ways. This transcendent function often requires psychological space to operate effectively. The archetypal dance also includes what Jung described as the sacred marriage, the union of opposing psychological energies within an individual. When someone loves you authentically, your relationship becomes a vessel for this inner psychological marriage, sometimes necessitating periods of introversion as they integrate these powerful inner energies that your connection has activated. Jung recognized that many relationship difficulties arise when people resist these archetypal rhythms, demanding constant presence when the psyche requires space for integration. Someone who truly understands these deeper psychological patterns respects the necessary ebbs and flows, knowing that temporary distance often serves the relationship's depth and longevity. This archetypal perspective transforms our understanding of love and distance. What seems like rejection becomes part of a larger psychological pattern, that has guided human relationships throughout history. The person who occasionally withdraws while loving you deeply isn't failing the relationship, but honoring the archetypal wisdom that understands how authentic connection requires both engagement and reflection. Jung observed that the most enduring relationships aren't those that maintain constant intensity, but those that respect these archetypal rhythms. They create space for each person to engage with the powerful psychological forces that intimacy inevitably activates, understanding that temporary separation often strengthens rather than weakens the bond. The dance of archetypes ultimately teaches us that love isn't just a feeling, but a psychological journey that encompasses both connection and solitude, proximity and distance. When someone loves you enough to engage with these archetypal patterns, they're participating in a profound psychological process that transcends ordinary understanding, a sacred dance that has guided human relationships since time immemorial. As we reflect on this journey through Jung's understanding of love's complex terrain, we're left with a profound question. What if the moments when someone seems to pull away are actually when they're loving you most deeply? Perhaps true love isn't found in constant presence or relentless attention, but in the courage to engage with the full psychological spectrum that authentic connection demands. Could it be that in giving each other space to integrate, transform, and become more whole, we're practicing the highest form of love? Jung might suggest that the real test of love isn't how close someone stays, but whether they're willing to dance with you through the natural rhythms of connection and solitude, knowing that each serves the deeper purpose of genuine intimacy. What if in our search for constant validation, we've been missing the profound love expressed in respectful distance and the silent acknowledgement of our psychological sovereignty? Perhaps it's time to reconsider what real love looks like, not as permanent fusion, but as a sacred dance of approach and withdrawal that honors the mystery at the heart of human connection.